For more than half a century, audiences adored them as Maria and Captain Von Trapp, Julie Andrews, radiant and full of life, Christopher Plummer, brooding yet magnetic. Together they carried the sound of music into history, their chemistry so effortless that fans believed it had to be real. But the truth was quieter and far more powerful. They were never lovers, yet what they shared ran deeper than most romances. For decades their lives moved in different directions. Still, the bond forged in Salzburg in 1965 refused to fade. Then, in the twilight of their years, came a moment no one expected. Before his death, Christopher Plummer reunited with Julie Andrews one final time. The cameras captured it, the world witnessed it, and the reunion left fans in tears. But what really happened when they came face to face? What did they say in that final embrace? And why did fans see it as more than just nostalgia, but a last goodbye? When The Sound of Music premiered in March of 1965, the Hollywood press treated it as just another musical, a pleasant diversion in a decade already filled with song and spectacle. No one expected it to become one of the highest-grossing films of all time. Yet within weeks it was breaking records. Families returned again and again, drawn by the purity of its story and the unforgettable music. To a world in turmoil, the tale of Maria, the captain, and the singing Von Trapp children offered comfort and hope. For Julie Andrews, the timing could not have been more perfect. Only a year earlier she had astonished audiences in Mary Poppins, winning the Academy Award and becoming Hollywood's new sweetheart. Now, as Maria, she solidified that image. Her voice seemed to come from another world, bright, clear, full of joy. She radiated warmth, embodying the idea that love and music could overcome even the darkest times. To audiences everywhere, she was instantly unforgettable. Christopher Plummer approached his role differently. Known on Broadway and in Shakespearean theater, he was respected but not yet a household name. He accepted the part of Captain Von Trapp with hesitation, worried that the character might come across as wooden or sentimental. Yet once filming began, he discovered layers of the role that intrigued him. His captain was stern, disciplined, almost forbidding, until Maria's presence began to crack the walls around his heart. When he sang Edelweiss, audiences saw a man rediscovering tenderness. That transformation, delivered with quiet vulnerability, became one of the film's most powerful moments. The chemistry between Andrews and Plummer was undeniable. On screen, their contrasting energies created sparks. Her brightness softened his edges, his gravitas anchored her exuberance. What might have been a simple romance suddenly felt believable, even timeless. Audiences could not look away. Many assumed the connection must have extended beyond the cameras. Yet in truth, it was trust, admiration, and a kind of professional companionship that gave their performances such authenticity. Behind the scenes, their dynamic fascinated the rest of the cast. Julie was disciplined, punctual, and always prepared, yet never without humor. She kept the children engaged between takes, teaching them songs, making them laugh. Christopher, often restless with the film's sweetness, found himself steadied by her good nature. He would later admit that her presence made the long months of shooting far easier. He pushed her toward dramatic depth, she pulled him toward levity. Together, they balanced one another. Even the young actors noticed. Charmian Carr, who played Liesel, once recalled how Julie became like a second mother to the children, while Christopher slipped naturally into the role of protective father. Their bond with the cast mirrored their roles on screen. This blending of reality and performance gave the film its unusual authenticity. It felt lived in, genuine, as though the actors truly were a family. The film's release was nothing short of a cultural event. The soundtrack topped charts around the world. Families packed theaters, sometimes returning dozens of times. The story resonated deeply because it was simple yet profound. Joy overcoming fear, love overcoming rigidity, music breaking through silence. When the Academy Awards arrived, The Sound of Music won 5, including Best Picture. By the end of the decade, it was among the most successful films ever made. For Julie and Christopher, however, the triumph carried a shadow. Almost overnight, they became Maria and the captain in the minds of audiences. Reporters asked endlessly about their relationship. Fans wrote letters, convinced they must have been in love off-screen. Even as they pursued other projects, that image clung to them. For Julie, The risk was being typecast as eternal sweetness. For Christopher, it was being frozen as the stern widower turned romantic hero. The very roles that made them immortal also tethered them. Julie leaned into the momentum at first. With Mary Poppins and The Sound of Music back to back, she was Hollywood's most bankable star. She took on musicals like Thoroughly Modern Millie and dramas like Hawaii and Star. Audiences adored her, critics praised her, and the industry treated her as untouchable. Yet privately she began to feel confined. No matter what roles she accepted, audiences still saw Maria. Even daring performances in later years such as Victor Victoria could not completely break the mold. She was grateful, but she also carried the frustration of being locked into an image she could never quite escape. Christopher's path was the opposite. He recoiled from the sweetness of The Sound of Music, jokingly referring to it as the sound of mucus. Determined not to be typecast, he threw himself back into the theater, tackling Hamlet, King Lear, Iago roles rich with darkness and complexity. On film he chose villains, anti-heroes, characters with jagged edges. He wanted to prove he was more than a sentimental father figure. Yet no matter what he did, journalists circled back to Salzburg. His resentment softened over the years, but the captain remained the role that defined him to the public. Their struggles mirrored one another in ironic ways. Julie adored for her perfection, sometimes wished for Christopher's freedom. Christopher, admired for his seriousness, sometimes envied Julie's universal love. Both were shaped and scarred by the same film. Yet whenever their paths crossed, something shifted. Julie's warmth softened his cynicism, and his sharp humor made her laugh more than anyone else could. In each other's presence, the shadow of Salzburg felt lighter. Through the 1970s and 80s, The Sound of Music refused to fade. Television broadcasts brought it to new generations, and anniversary celebrations began to pull the cast back together. For audiences, these reunions became proof that the bond between Maria and the captain was real. When Julie and Christopher appeared side by side, the air seemed to change. She spoke fondly of the film's legacy, he teased about its sentimentality, and their shared glances told the rest of the story. By the 30th anniversary in 1995, nostalgia had deepened into reverence. A televised reunion showed them sitting together, trading stories, and teasing each other like old friends. Christopher, older now but still sharp, admitted half-reluctantly that Julie had been the heart of the production. Fans were moved, sensing affection beneath his humor, perhaps even regret for years of keeping distance from the film. The 40th anniversary in 2005 revealed an even deeper bond. Christopher's edges had softened. His jokes carried warmth instead of sting. Julie radiated gratitude, embracing the film fully. Sitting together, they looked less like co-stars and more like companions who had traveled through decades side by side. Families watching felt the continuity. Parents who had once been children during the film's release now introduced it to their own children. Julie and Christopher weren't just actors anymore. They were part of people's lives. Every reunion carried more meaning. The affection between them wasn't rehearsed. It revealed itself in the way Julie touched his arm, the way he looked at her before speaking, the way they laughed at private memories. These details proved their friendship was not a performance. It was real. And with each passing year, fans began to wonder, how many more times would they see Maria and the captain together? By the time Julie Andrews and Christopher Plummer walked on stage together for what would become their final reunion, more than 50 years had passed since Salzburg. The applause that greeted them was thunderous, rising like a wave, and it did not stop. It wasn't just admiration for their individual careers, it was gratitude for the shared history they embodied. The audience knew they were seeing more than a pair of actors. They were seeing living symbols of a story that had shaped generations. Julie, always poised, smiled warmly, bowing her head slightly, as if humbled by the adoration. Christopher, leaner now, his voice quieter but still carrying a bite of humor, smirked at the ovation, pretending impatience but clearly moved. When they turned toward each other, the years seemed to fall away. He leaned in, whispered a remark only she could hear, and she burst into laughter. In that moment, the decades collapsed into a memory of Salzburg, when they were Maria and the captain. The conversation began with familiar questions. What had it been like to film in Austria? Did they know the film would become such a phenomenon? Julie answered warmly, recalling the long hours, the energy of the children, the beauty of the landscapes. Christopher rolled his eyes at the sweetness of it all, drawing laughter, but then his tone changed. With the candor that sometimes comes only late in life, he admitted the film had given him far more than he ever acknowledged. He turned to Julie, praising her humor, her discipline, her grace. He called her the anchor of the production, the center around which the rest revolved. Julie's eyes misted as she listened, and the audience leaned forward. It was not just sentimentality, it was confession. For decades, Christopher had joked about the sound of music, but here, before Julie and before the world, he admitted what it had truly meant. Yet what moved the audience most was not his words but their silences. The way Julie glanced at him as he spoke, her expression softened with affection. The way he looked at her, searching her face before answering questions, their pauses revealed what words could not. A lifetime of friendship, loyalty, and trust passed quietly between them. As the evening drew to a close, the cast rose to take their bows. And then came the moment fans still talk about. Christopher turned toward Julie and embraced her. She leaned into him, her hand resting on his chest, his arm firm around her shoulders. The audience for a heartbeat fell silent. In that embrace they saw more than nostalgia. They saw history and farewell. The applause that followed was thunderous, yet beneath it was the hush of recognition. This might be the last time Maria and the captain would stand together. The photographs taken that night spread across the world. Julie's smile, Christopher's protective gesture, the warmth between them. These images became the defining pictures of their partnership. Fans did not know it then, but they were looking at a goodbye. In the years that followed, Christopher's appearances grew fewer. Age slowed him, and though he continued to work, the pace was gentler. When news broke on February 5, 2021, that he had passed away at the age of 91, tributes poured in instantly. Journalists celebrated his Shakespearean mastery, his Oscar-winning performance in Beginners, his late career brilliance. Fellow actors spoke of his wit, his precision, his presence. But for millions, one memory rose above the rest: Captain Von Trapp, and beside him, always, Julie Andrews. The world turned to her for a statement, and when it came, it was short, dignified, and piercing. She called him a consummate actor and a cherished friend. Just a handful of words, but they carried the weight of decades. For those who had watched their bond unfold across 50 years, the meaning was clear. Julie had lost more than a colleague. She had lost the only person who fully understood what it meant to be bound forever to Salzburg, to Maria and the captain, to the shadow and the blessing of that film. Fans wept not only for Christopher but for Julie. They remembered the laughter they had shared at reunions, the private glances, the protective embraces. Social media filled with clips of their final appearance together, with photographs of that last hug. What had once seemed like a celebration now looked like prophecy, a final glimpse of them side by side before the curtain fell. Families who had passed the sound of music down through generations felt the loss personally. To them, Julie and Christopher were not distant celebrities but members of the family, present every holiday season, their voices echoing in homes around the world. His death felt like the closing of a chapter in their own lives. For Julie, the grief carried a unique weight. She had survived the loss of her singing voice in the 1990s, endured the death of her beloved husband Blake Edwards in 2010, and weathered professional setbacks that might have broken others. But Christopher's passing touched a part of her life no one else could. He was not her partner in marriage, nor her family by blood, yet he was irreplaceable. He was the only one who had carried the same burden, the blessing and the curse of being frozen in time by the sound of music. In later interviews, whenever his name arose, her tone shifted. She spoke with dignity, always careful, but the affection beneath her words was unmistakable. She called him a dear friend, a man of immense talent, a constant presence in her memory. Observers saw the truth in her eyes, in the pauses between her sentences. She missed him profoundly, and she carried the memory of that final reunion like a treasure. For fans, Christopher's death crystallized what they had always known. The bond between Julie and Christopher was not a performance. It was not publicity, nor nostalgia exaggerated for cameras. It was real, a friendship that endured across 5 decades, strengthened by loyalty, laughter, and honesty. That truth made the loss sting even more. People wept not only because Christopher Plummer was gone, but because they understood what he had meant to Julie Andrews. The image that spread most widely in the days after his death was not of him alone, nor even of him as Captain Von Trapp. It was the photograph of him holding Julie in that final embrace. To many, it looked like prophecy, as though fate had arranged one last glimpse before the curtain closed forever. That reunion became more than memory. It became a symbol, a reminder that some connections are too deep to be undone by time, that the people who touch our lives in profound ways never truly leave us. Julie and Christopher had given the world a love story on screen, but in real life they had shown something rarer, a friendship strong enough to last a lifetime, tender enough to move the world to tears when it ended. Julie Andrews and Christopher Plummer were never just co-stars. They were two lives forever intertwined by a single film, carried through decades of triumph and hardship. From Salzburg's hills to anniversary stages, they showed the world that their bond was more than fiction. It was loyalty, trust, and quiet love of a different kind. Their last reunion before Christopher's passing was not simply nostalgia. It was a farewell written in laughter, in glances, in an embrace that fans will treasure long after both are gone. And when Julie spoke of him as a cherished friend, the world understood the depth of that truth. Some stories fade, theirs endures. As long as the sound of music plays, Julie and Christopher will remain side by side, eternal symbols of connection and of the tears we shed when the final goodbye comes. For more emotional stories, check out this video.